it's kind of fun. The listeners don't mind, and it's okay. It's your show. You can do it any way you want.
Whatever rocks your boat, baby, go for it.
You can do it. You can do it all day long.
You might be able to tell what kind of show we are in for today, as this is episode number 26, and we're going to talk about the 5 most popular show formats to grow your audience. And you're going to hear us having fun, but at the same time giving you good, solid advice and insights and tips. So stay tuned.
Podcast by Friday with Bill Griggs and Kingsley Grant. We help people to create their minimal viable podcast by taking bold action to defeat procrastination and to get their voices heard.
I am Kingsley Grant.
And I'm Bill Griggs.
And we are the hosts of Podcast by Friday. Hey, Bill, what's up, man? It's great to be able to get back again today behind the microphone as we do on a weekly basis with our Podcast by Friday. How's things going?
Man, Kingsley, things are going great. Thank you for asking. This is always the highlight of my week when we get together to record our episode of Podcast by Friday.
You know, it's mine as well, because I find it to be something that out of my week, it takes me a different direction. It takes me to put my mind in the whole more technical, and it's so funny. My wife would say sometimes to me, kind of geeky. I would try to geek out, and I said to her, "Well, it's just a chance of just being able to be around like-minded people." So I look forward to this myself as well.
Yeah, I realize when we do these. That it's more than just some project that we're working on. It's something that we're creating that we have a blast with. It gets us a chance to get together and get our message out there and get our voices heard.
Which is what the podcast is all about, right? It's a bit for us to get our voices heard in a manner, and that people who are listening in right now, that's the whole purpose of it. And I think we are demonstrating or modeling exactly what it is that happens here. And I do have, like I want to mention up front here, that I said to you how I've been battling a cold. And so I have this moments where a cough may come. So as you're listening, if you hear my voice start fading and a cough is going to come, that's what's going to happen. So I'll let you know up front. If you hear some crackling in my voice, that's what's going on. But you know what? It's like better than the post office service, where if you're in the U.S., that they show up in rain and sleek. We show up the podcast no matter what it is going on, because this is what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am just recovering from laryngitis. I had absolutely no voice, and I had a 2-week hiatus there while I recovered my voice enough to do podcast episodes. So it has affected both CNC Router Tips and Podcast by Friday. So this is a reality of broadcasting. Sometimes your voice goes away.
Yeah.
And you have to wait. But, it's all part of our transparent plan to keep things real and let you know what's going on. So if you hear a cough, please just excuse us. We'll try and edit most of them out, but, life is life.
Like I just did just now, while you were talking, I had a cough coming on. I just hit the mute key, the button, so that at least that would not be sounded. So I can control that part of it when I'm not doing the speaking, which is really what it tells you as you're listening in. You have some control over what it is you do. You can mute, you can pause and start back over. And that's really one of the wonderful things of podcasting, or let it stay in it and show authenticity and make things real. And what I like about you and I doing this show today is that we're doing it as a co-host, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but it allows me to see you and hear you. So if I want to go on pause, I can go on pause while you're talking, and vice versa. So today's show is really about the 5 most popular show formats to grow your audience, Bill. So what is it we have for our audience today?
It's something that we've experimented with quite a bit when we first got started with podcast by Friday. For those of our listeners who don't know, when Kingsley and I started this program almost a year ago now, we got together in a hotel room and we were discussing, the topics that we were going to cover. And we had a discussion about what format we should have the show in. Were we going to do an interview show, a question and answer? What exactly would what form would the show take? And I don't remember which of us came up with the idea, but I think it was brilliant. We said, hey, well, for the first few shows, why don't we just do them each episode in a different format and see which one resonates with us, and also use it as a learning experience for our listeners.
Well, if it was a brilliant idea, Bill, it had to be you. So that's I'll give you credit for that. Give you credit for that. But I
don't know. You got as many as I have, bro.
I think you mentioned the word format, Bill. A lot of podcasts out there, we hear so many different kind of formats that shows could go in, and we've chosen one particular one for our show right now. But what are some of those formats that we hear most often or see in the podcast world more than any? What are some that we want to talk about today?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a brief rundown of some of the formats that we hear, and then we can discuss them a little more in depth. How's that?
Sounds good to me.
So one of the most popular formats out there is the interview format, where you have a guest on and you ask them questions and talk to them about their story. Another is the solo show, which is just you and your microphone talking to your audience. Then there's the co-host show, which is what Kingsley and I do, where two of us interact with each other. And there's also another type, which is a question and answer show. And we'll have to go into that one a little more detail in the episode. And probably the last one that I'd like to include in these list of the 5 most popular show formats to grow your audience is the NPR style narrative form, where they're telling a story in the voice of the narrator, interspersed with some other stuff. So we'll get into that as we progress in this episode.
I think I think you touched on what I believe is the most often used one is the interview format, and most of the big shows out there do have that, and it creates, I believe, such an opportunity to engage and bring people in and put you in a position where you can meet other people and really create a sphere of influence of some kind, because you can leverage those association. But what are some of the reasons why a person may then, in addition to what I just said, Bill, choose an interview format?
Well, one major reason for choosing an interview format is because it elevates you to the level of expertise of the person that you're interviewing. So we can't all be experts in every facet of our business. And so we associate with people who are experts in that particular facet. And we have them come on and tell us what they know in an interview style podcast. And that brings the whole show up another level. They say tide raises all ships. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of one of the major advantages, in my opinion, of the interview format.
Yeah, and I really believe that's true, and I think that it does, give you that position and create in the people's eyes. If you're interviewing that person, you must be someone to have gotten that person on your show. Number one, and number two, that the expertise part come in because you're asking very good questions, as if you knew the industry, and you may not know the industry because you are just a very good interviewer that listens well. But I find also that what I've seen, Bill, is it creates for you an opportunity, I believe, to build relationships with people long term. Because when you interview somebody, that person is not just a one interview and it's a one knock off and it's gone. No, you're now able to engage with that person and in many ways and share some of the things that they shared on the interview. And also I find it helps you with content because you may not have enough to talk about, but you can get gauge or get some more stuff, some juice, so to speak, from your guest who you're interviewing.
Mm-hmm. And there's a couple other big reasons why the interview format is very popular. One of them is the variety that it brings to your show. When you have many people coming in to talk about their topics, it's not going to be boring because, one day you could be talking about microphones. Another day you could be talking about how to script your show. It just all really depends on the expertise that the person you're interviewing brings in. And the other thing that I think is really cool about the interview shows is they're learning shows. They're opportunity shows because you brought somebody in who's teaching you a little mini course in every episode about a topic that you're interested in and that your listeners are interested in.
Yeah, and I love that one because I find that sometimes people who we know today and look up to in the industry and the space we're in, they have now been seen as the expert or the guru because they've listened to so many guests. And they have even taken the content and produced books or ebooks because of the quality of that and just captured it in one place and made it available to people who wanted that. So I think that's really one of the most important formats because I believe it brings to you things that you might not have otherwise had.
Mm-hmm. So I thought that one thing, since we did so many different styles and formats in the beginning stage of this show, that it might be interesting to go back and look at an episode that we may have done in that style. And in that vein, I'd like to bring your attention to episode 6 that we did on Podcast by Friday. You can get to that by going podcastbyfriday.com/6. The number 6 or 06, we'll get to there as well. And that will take you to our interview with Joel Boggess. Joel is a friend and a mentor to both of us, and it was our pleasure to have him on our show as our first interview.
Yeah, and so you hear what that looks like from where both of us interviewed him and engaged in that process, and which I think is really a good way to demonstrate what we're talking about here. And again, leverage that relationship with Joel, and it's also awesome. But I believe it's also important here, Bill, because the guests you're interviewing may also have a platform of some kind, and followers who now they're going to take what you've shared, interview them with, and possibly some will share that with their own people. So you now have leveraged that one interview with not only your audience, but also their audience. Now you've kept it in one shot, 2 different audiences. So that's really a win-win for me in doing an interview format.
And the last thing that I want to say about the interview format is sometimes it gives you the opportunity to appear on your guest's show.
That's true.
Yeah, that's an added bonus. It's you ask after you've given. It's very difficult to say no. And I think, Bill, we spent a little time on this because I think it's one of the most used and format when as you're listening in. I'm sure you may have already agreed and say, yeah, most podcasts you listen to have somebody being interviewed. I want to mention this as we move to our next format before we go there, Bill. One of the downsides to this is, especially when you go to show at the show and the same person being interviewed from one podcast to the other, it's almost like I've heard that story before. It's almost like and you tune it out. So that's one of the dangers if you try to find just the influencers that everybody is looking for and have heard their story a million times. But again, you can then choose a different style and say, hey, what if I interview people that are more with my audience and share how they are doing life, because that resonates more with the audience than somebody who's so far away. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention just as a cautionary note here. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm glad you pointed that out because that is a very good point. Now, let us move on to our next format of the 5 most popular show formats to grow your audience.
And that's a solo show.
Yeah, that's a solo show. Now, I do a solo show myself. Have you done or currently doing a solo show?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I do. I've done solo shows for a long time, and I really love that format for many reasons. I think it helps me to demonstrate my expertise in an area, and I believe it's a way you really are able to demonstrate clearly that you have an expertise in something, because you have to create the content yourself. You have to show that you know your stuff, what you're talking about. And my shows can go from 35 to 45 minutes, and I'm just sitting behind the microphone speaking into a mic, and nobody is in the room, but I'm thinking about that one person that I'm talking to, right? People call it avatar, your persona, that person that you want to make certain to hear your voice. So I find it to be a great way to demonstrate your expertise, but you better know what you're talking about, because you also do the very same thing, Bill, in an expert area that you are very much versed in and can do for maybe 2 or 3 hours straight.
Yeah. It really depends on how deep the subject matter is and how deep you want to go into it. Kingsley, what's the name of your solo podcast?
Smooth Career Change. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, that's what we do. So just quickly tell us what the premise of that show is.
Yeah, it's basically to help people who are transitioning from one career and is trying to get into a side business or a full-time business, and they want to do something that they really love, and they don't know where to start, how to go about doing it, and they have to deal with all these mental shifts and all that stuff. So I help them figure out how to do it smoothly and with minimal disruption of their current lifestyle.
Okay, and if anybody wanted to listen to that, they could go to smoothcareerchange.com.
Yes, and they hear all the episodes I've done, over 250 episodes they'll find there.
Yeah, and they're also on iTunes.
Yeah, on Stitcher and Google Play. Yes, thanks. Yeah.
So I have a solo show called CNC Router Tips, where I talk to people about a very technical issue, and their problems that they may have with computerized machines. So that's the show that I do is a solo show, and I've been into this for quite a while. Most of this decade, and it's something that I enjoy talking about quite a bit. So if you want to check that out, it's at cncroutertips.com. You can get episodes there. One of the things I like about the solo show is that I get to set the topic, and I get to set up, what it is that I want to cover that week. And if I haven't covered the issue in enough detail at the end of an episode, I can always do another one based on that subject matter, and get it fully fleshed out and fully covered. There's really no one to say to me, okay, that's enough. You're done, except me. And that's the beauty of doing a solo show. You get to set just how deep you go into a topic.
And so, Bill, in addition to what you just said, I think that one of the beauties about the solo show as well is that you can decide on for example, if you're a series you want to do. So if I want to go and not have a scattered, like in the interview, you have people who are coming in with their own ideas and their own agendas and so on. Whereas in my solo show, I can decide for a whole month, I'm going to do a topic just on one thing and do 4 shows that's not interrupted. And I can also package that eventually if I wanted to do an ebook, do a book, or do a course. That is a show I can create that way. Whereas the interview, you won't have that smooth flow of ideas.
Mm-hmm. And, your solo show can be the fact that it's a solo show doesn't mean that you have to just stick with, random talking. You could do other of these formats inside of a solo show. And, this applies across any of these topics you can combine.
Yes.
Too. But let's continue on before we get into that, because that's exactly. a ninja trick that we want to tell you about later.
So the next one we have, Bill, is what you and I do right here. It's called co-hosting, right? And this is really a very neat one. I really like this because we can feed off each other. And I love the fact that when we do this, we can just get on a podcast, behind the microphone and start sharing and start just developing ideas because we're kind of feeding off each other. And so I love this, and it helps really in content creation. And we are both on the same page, going in the same direction. So I really like this. And sometimes we can have bantering and disagreement and all of those things, which is just really the fun part of the show. So this is another format which I believe a number of people do. But you have to, I find, have a good relationship with the host or the co-host so that it comes through. You can feel that these guys, they like each other, they love each other, they really have a good sense of like camaraderie going on. And I think that's where you can tell when two people are doing a show that they really love to do, and people can feel and hear that coming through.
I agree. It's different. If you did not like your co-host, I don't think that it would be possible to pull off a co-host show, unless it's a point counterpoint type of show.
Yeah.
You know, if you had, let's say, let's go political for a second, which we never do. If you had a Republican and a Democrat as the co-host of the show, and their point was to go back and forth and shoot, arrows at each other, it might make for interesting listening, but boy, it sure would be stressful.
Yeah, I can see if they really like, say, I know some husband and wives who are, one is one party, the other is another party, or conservative or liberal, and they still, at the end of the day, they're one. They don't really allow it to get in the way. I can see how that could be a very exciting show because, you're arguing back and forth in a loving way that it's not really injurious to the relationship, right? But I like what you're saying because that could be, we could one day try one of those things, Bill. We could pick a subject matter and just begin to go back and forth and see how it works.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel that we learn the most from each other when we are disagreeing on a point, and we listen to each other's reasoning behind. There have been things where like I'm vehemently opposed when we start, and then you tell me what you're thinking, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I never would have thought of that because you came at it at a totally different angle from me. Now it makes sense. I buy that. And there's other times where I walk away. No.
I know. I really like that, and I enjoy it because that's how I grow, and I really know it's from a good place. It's not an ill will. From a place of ill will is goodwill. So I can receive that. And to me, I love that because growth occur. We stretch each other. We're good for each other. So I really like that co-host aspect to the format if it's done in that spirited way.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I want to bring out, and this is kind of a little non sequitur, is that you have to be willing to pivot in your decisions on how you're going to do your show. If you're trying one of these three methods that we've mentioned so far, three formats that we've mentioned so far, and it doesn't fit, you have to be willing to look in and see what other formats might fit your needs. I know when I started the CNC Router Tips podcast, it was actually a question and answer show,
which is our next format.
Yeah, which is our next format, and over time, it has morphed into not only an interview format show, but a question and answer show, and periodically, just your regular old solo show. So it's kind of fun. The listeners don't mind, and it's okay. It's your show. You can do it any way you want.
Whatever rocks your boat, baby, go for it.
So let's talk a little bit about the question and answer stuff, Kingsley.
I really like that. One of the most popular one, I think, is Pat Flynn with his show is a Q&A only. And what's the name of the show again?
It's Ask Pat.
Ask Pat, right? And other people have modeled their shows like his or have shows like his even before he started. Mm-hmm. And really, it's time people share their questions and you answer those in your episode. As a matter of fact, in my own solo show on Smooth Career Change, what I started doing recently, I answer questions in Quora as an expert person in there who people ask questions and I answer those. And that's Quora.com, Quora.com. And what happened is I take some of those questions and start recently, the last several episodes, when I do a solo show, I insert those questions and answers inside my episode. So I will read the question and then answer the question that I gave in Quora right on the show. So at least it's helping the audience to know that people are asking this question that they might be able to also relate to. Other times, a person may, have a recorded question, like in Pat's show, and they send that recording in audio format, and you tie that in, you play the recording, and then you give the answer right there in the show, and that becomes your show. So it's really a great way to mix it up, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is the way that I did it when I was doing Q&A episodes on the CNC Router Tips podcast. I used a tool called SpeakPipe, SpeakPipe. And SpeakPipe would allow people to leave a voicemail message with a question. And they had like 90 seconds or something to leave their message. And so I would give them a URL that would take them directly to the CNC Router Tips SpeakPipe channel, and they could leave me a message. And if their question was good, I would do an episode based on that, and I'd give them credit and maybe send them a nice little gift at the end of that for having submitted a question. So it's really a nice way to do it and to operate, but you have to have traction. You have to have some interaction already going, I think, with your audience before it has enough action to sustain you.
Right. I'm sorry, go ahead. Finish your statement.
In my case, I had a Facebook group that, allowed me to get those questions. But, if you're starting from scratch, you may have to build something and, go in social media where the people are.
Yeah, and have them even ask questions of you, and you can answer in your social media, which is a great place you mentioned, Bill. And then if you want to just take those same questions and bring it into your podcast, because it's taking the same content and repurposing it someplace else that you already have it out there. So in my case, in Quora, I just take what I have answered there, which questions are around career transition, and take it is fit into my show. So I just bring it right in. And then now I have a Q&A part of my solo show where I'm doing all of the talking, but I'm reading the question and answering as well. So it's really a great format, I believe, for people who have built some traction and want to have people listen in on the questions that are being asked and then answering the way, because if one person asks, possibly 50 had the same question as well.
Yeah, and the question and answer show also does another thing for you that is one reason why it makes it popular and can help grow your audience. It establishes you as an expert on your subject because, people are contacting you for answers. And even if your answer is, I don't know, I'll have to research it, you're further ahead than, the listener's further ahead than they would have been, without answering the question. Obviously, you try and avoid answering those questions with, gee, I don't know, unless it's a, gee, I don't know, let me ask an expert in that field. And, transfer your level of expertise to that expert in the field and maybe get them to guest answer on your podcast. Nothing wrong with that.
So I see that really as a format that's also could really work, and I think you could build a whole show around that, like Ask Pat have done and others as well.
Okay.
Which leads us then, Bill, now to our other format, which is a narrative style of podcast recording, or how a person can do their podcast. And we have done that to some degree, and you probably have a little more knowledge about this than I do. So why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I got fascinated with this particular style of podcast from listening to a podcast that is put out by NPR, the National Public Radio people, that was very popular a few years ago. It was called Serial. And, many of you may have listened to that. It broke all kinds of podcasting records for, audience listens and everything. But it was a story told in narrative form about a murder trial that had occurred. And at the end of it, you had to make your own conclusions about whether the person was guilty or innocent. And it was kind of interesting because, they might start out with this story. It was a rainy day when Kingsley Grant was walking across the, board. It says, little did he know that his life would change when he reached the end of the block. And then there'd be an interview with Kingsley saying.
And when I get to the block, their approaching me was this guy that I didn't see coming. And he just, out of nowhere, he sucker punched me and the lights went out. It was dark.
And that's when Kingsley, woke up. But you get the idea. Yeah. It just tells a little bit of the story from the narrative producer. We can do this section over again because this sucks.
No, it's fine. Let's stay in there because you know what? This is the whole point of Raw. Yeah. This is what we're trying to do here. Is just show, hey, this is what podcasting is all about. We can control what we keep in and what we take out.
Well, yeah, and we might take that out. Clip. But anyway, the whole point of the narrative podcast and what made it so powerful in the case of Serial is that it is very highly edited. It requires an entire production staff and it's scripted. It's not off the top of your head stuff. And it combines some of the features of interview podcasts where somebody's telling their story and they're clipping it up into little sound bites that they're putting together into this nice, well-produced saga that you listen to, and you get pulled along. You might hear a little bit of some of the great writing tricks being used in it, like foreshadowing, or the suspension of disbelief and things like that. Used in telling a good story, and that's what the narrative style, or the NPR style, if you want, is all about.
I think, as a matter of fact, Bill, we're not the NPR status because they have, like I said, full-fledged staff that does nothing but that. But we tried our own way of doing a narrative style, right? And we have an episode that we did that kind of showcase, where, I wouldn't say in a way like NPR did, a Serial did, but I think it's our own Serial type of narrative style, right?
Sure. Our very first episode of Podcast by Friday was called On the Ledge. And we did that in narrative style to some extent. And it was kind of funny because we were trying to put out a podcast by Friday, literally, from the Friday following our conference at the Podcast Movement Conference. And we began editing this, and it takes quite a bit of editing because you're cutting and pasting together different sound bites throughout the thing. And so we had agreed that by Friday at midnight, however far we were into our process, that's what we would release. And so if you look in our feed at podcastbyfriday.com and you look back at the episodes, you'll see On the Ledge was our premiere episode. It was the pilot, I think we called it, episode. And it's about 8 minutes long. But the following episode we released a few days later was called On the Ledge, the Director's Cut. And it was about 24 minutes long or 22 minutes long. I'm not really sure. But that's, how much longer. It took us a couple of days to finish the difference between the 8-minute episode and the 22-minute episode. So, that is one of the cons of trying to do the narrative style of podcasts, is that it is very editing, very intensive editing is involved in that.
Yeah, and that's what I think for someone who wants to do the minimal type of podcast we're suggesting here, I would not recommend necessarily that format as for you to be able to have your podcast out by Friday. It's very labor intensive, as Bill said, in so many different ways. And so I would kind of be more, careful, I guess, if that's a word, than to suggest that. But we want to make sure we mentioned it anyway, just in case, right?
I'm going to disagree.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to disagree. If you've got a team working with you to put out your episode and, you can get it together, I wouldn't let the narrative format be something that stopped you from producing your podcast. If that's the way you want it to sound and that's the way you want to do it, just go put it out there. Put it out, put out a pilot episode like we did, just a taste, or, break it up into lots of little episodes or whatever's necessary to get it out there, to get your voice heard. But it is a very powerful, very intriguing format for your podcast. And, you can grow quite a large audience from a narrative style podcast. It just takes a lot of work.
And that's why where I'm suggesting, Bill, because we want this person to, as you're listening, we want you to get going fast. And the last thing I want you to do is, because you may not, because I think, Bill, you're assuming they have the technical skills and possibly some help, but I may not, they may just be like me and you who don't have that. And, and speaking for myself, I don't. So I don't want to put you in a position to say, you know what, man, I love the NPR style. That's me, but I just don't have. No, if you don't have what Bill just suggested as the, support team around you, and you are good at technical stuff and editing and all that, I would just say, hey, you know what, just pick another format for right now and get started.
Yep. Or combine little sections of your show in several of these formats, mix them together and put it out there. There's no rules.
That's true. I agree with that. No, I wouldn't argue with that at all.
Rules. It's your show. You get to have it sound the way you want it to sound. You get to choose if you want to do a solo show, if you want to do an interview show, if you want to do a co-host or a question and answer or a narrative. You can do it. What is it in Happy Gilmore and all those other movies you see with Adam Sandler? There's a guy standing there that says, you can do it. You can do it all day long. So
I'm glad that you do believe and have such great faith. And I do too in you as a listener. And I think Billy's only demonstrating the fact that he strongly believe in you. And I do as well. And, whatever you want to do, hey, if it rocks your boat, go ahead and just keep on go sailing, my friend. So we've covered then. I'm sorry, these 5 most popular show formats to grow your audience: interview format, solo show, co-host, question and answer, and the narrative style. And you started saying something earlier, which I think you kind of held off to now mention, about the idea of how you could blend or you kind of do the hybrid approach. So where were you going with that idea? Where were you had some thoughts on that and something you were about to say?
Well, it's a very useful tool to be able to use the best format to express the particular information that you're trying to get across to your audience. Some things question and answer are perfect for. Some things, the solo show is perfect for. The interviews, narrative style, what have you. Knowing when to use each of these formats is probably the art of podcasting, and maybe beyond the scope. But just knowing that you can mix and match as you see fit can be very powerful. Now, there are shows that are very formulaic. Yeah, let's try that again. Formulaic. Thank you. We're going to leave that in too. There are shows that are very formulaic, that do each episode the same way every time. And one great example of that is eofire.com. That's Entrepreneur on Fire by John Lee Dumas. He has a very rigid script flow that he goes through for every episode, where he's asking essentially the same question at the end of the show for everybody. And, he takes them through, what's their aha moment? What's this, this and that. He has various steps that he goes through in each episode, and that works for him. But if he wanted to, he could change it up and do any other style that he wanted, and folks would still listen. Would it be as effective? Who knows? But you won't know until you try.
That's right.
So my suggestion is to go out and try some of this stuff. Mix and match if you want. These are the 5 most popular show formats that we know of to grow your audience. So taking any one of these and combining it with any other one of these, you're still in the top 5, man. You're gonna hit it out of the park if you've got a good message and a good sound.
And what we want to kind of do a challenge here is when you have done and chosen a format or a combination thereof, we would love to hear what it is you've done. So you can let us know through an email at podcastbyfriday.com. And you can also join our Facebook group, because I would love to see what it is you did as a result of this episode today, and, share it with us. So go ahead, Bill.
I got a great idea.
Okay.
We didn't discuss this ahead of time, folks. I got a great idea.
I'm holding my breath.
Let us put it out there to our listeners. Let us challenge them to produce a 2-minute episode.
Okay.
Release it. Give us a link. And maybe we'll take the best ones that come in and put them together and combine it in this show, and maybe get you a little traction. Maybe somebody listening to your episode through the exposure you may get from having your little 2-minute podcast put out there.
Great idea. I love that idea, because I think, you know what? Again, it just shows you how we're willing to open. Even the format of that is simply saying we take those little clips and snips of what you put together and create a show. Hey, again, it just shows you that the versatility of what it is you can do through your podcast is incredible.
So what do we call that? How about 2-minute challenge?
Okay.
All right. So if you want to take part in this, you could just go to podcastbyfriday.com/2minute. 2 minutes with an S.
Yes.
The number 2 and minutes.
And that way you can just engage with us there, and as Bill suggested. So would they load that up how would they send the file to us, Bill, you're suggesting? Because they could send it as an attached file. They could send it, through Google. They could send it through a Dropbox. I mean, there's a number of ways that.
The easiest way for them to do that, Kingsley, would be to go ahead and put it up on their. We've given them the information since episode 19 on how to go about setting up and executing the podcast by Friday. So they should already know, and if they don't, they can go back and listen to the other episodes where we tell them and show them how to get their media hosted. All we need is the URL where their episode is, their RSS feed. In other words, it's same thing, different names. They can just send us that, and we don't have to host it on our site and whatever. We can just go there and grab it.
Good point. I like that. So let's make sure that you get to us as quickly. We want you to do this right away. Don't wait. Don't wait another month or another 2 weeks. Jump in, get it done, and we hope that we will take your clips and have an episode based around that. And hey, we'll give you a shout out and promote that, and people will have a chance to get to know about you and where to find you as well.
Yep, and on that page that we haven't created yet, but we're about to, it will have a spot for your name, the name of your podcast, and the URL, and what format you want it to, that it was, and you can just check the box for all that apply. And, hopefully we can help you grow your audience, because that's the whole point of this episode, was to tell you and share with you the 5 most popular show formats to help you grow your audience.
And so as we kind of wrap it up here, again, remember, it is 5. Interview format, the solo show format, the co-host format, Q&A format, and the narrative style. Choose one, get started, and let us know what you've done.
Well, I'm so glad that we had this episode and got a chance to share this with our listeners, Kingsley. And if they would like to get a hold of us, they can do that through our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/podcast by Friday, or they can get us
through email
at
podcastbyfriday.com.
Podcast by Friday. Take bold action to create your minimal viable podcast today. Check out new episodes at podcastbyfriday.com or on iTunes or Spreaker.